Sarah Martinez had always believed that success in the corporate world required playing by unwritten rules. At 28, she had climbed the ladder at Blackstone Industries faster than anyone expected, earning her position as senior marketing director through late nights, brilliant campaigns, and an unwavering determination to prove herself in a male-dominated field. The glass towers of downtown reflected the morning sun as Sarah walked into the office that Tuesday, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floors. She wore her favorite navy blazer, the one that made her feel invincible during important meetings. Today was different, though. Today, she would finally present her revolutionary marketing strategy to the board of directors, a presentation that could change everything for both her career and the company. Marcus Blackstone, the CEO's nephew and head of operations, had been watching Sarah's rise with growing resentment. At 35, he had inherited his position through family connections rather than merit, and Sarah's obvious competence made him increasingly uncomfortable. His colleagues whispered about how she deserved his job, how she understood the business better than he ever would. These whispers had been eating away at him for months. The morning started routinely enough. Sarah arrived at her office to find her assistant, Jenny, already organizing files for the board presentation. The campaign Sarah had developed would revolutionize how Blackstone Industries approached their target market, potentially increasing revenue by 30% over the next fiscal year. She had spent 6 months researching, analyzing data, and crafting the perfect strategy. "The presentation materials are ready," Jenny informed her, setting a steaming cup of coffee on Sarah's desk. "The board meeting starts at 10 and everyone's excited to hear your proposal," Sarah smiled, feeling a familiar rush of anticipation. This presentation represented everything she had worked toward. If successful, it would likely earn her the promotion to Vice President of Marketing, a position that had remained vacant for months. She had prepared for every possible question, anticipated every concern, and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. At 9:30, Sarah gathered her materials and headed toward the executive conference room. The hallways buzzed with the usual morning energy, colleagues greeting each other and discussing weekend plans. She felt confident, prepared, and ready to showcase months of hard work. However, as she approached the conference room, Marcus intercepted her path. His expression was stern, almost hostile, which immediately put Sarah on alert. She had noticed his behavior becoming increasingly cold over the past few weeks, but she had attributed it to stress from the company's upcoming merger discussions. "Sarah, we need to talk," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge she had never heard before. "My office." Now, confused but maintaining her professional composure, Sarah followed him down the hall to his corner office. The room was decorated with expensive artwork and family photos, constant reminders of his privileged position within the company hierarchy. Marcus closed the door behind them and walked to his desk, turning to face her with crossed arms. "I've been reviewing your presentation materials," he began, though Sarah knew she hadn't shared the complete files with anyone except Jenny. "There are some serious concerns about the direction you're proposing." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach, but she kept her voice steady. "What specific concerns?" "I've researched every aspect thoroughly, and the data supports all my recommendations." Marcus moved closer, his presence becoming uncomfortably intimidating. "The concerns aren't just about the strategy, Sarah. They're about your attitude, your approach to this company, and your understanding of hierarchy." Sarah realized this conversation had nothing to do with her presentation and everything to do with Marcus feeling threatened by her success. She had encountered workplace politics before, but never anything this blatant or personal. "I'm not sure what you mean," Sarah replied carefully, though she suspected exactly where this was heading. "You've been acting like you run this place," Marcus continued, his voice rising slightly, "making decisions without consulting me, going directly to other department heads, treating me like I'm just another colleague instead of your superior." Sarah felt anger beginning to bubble up inside her, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every interaction he described had been completely appropriate and within her job responsibilities. She had never overstepped boundaries or acted disrespectfully toward anyone, including Marcus. "I've always followed proper protocols," she said firmly. "Every decision I've made has been within my authority as senior marketing director. If you have specific examples of inappropriate behavior, I'd like to discuss them." Marcus stepped even closer, and Sarah could smell his cologne mixed with what seemed like alcohol despite the early hour. His eyes held a coldness that made her skin crawl, and she realized this confrontation was about much more than professional disagreements. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You're going to withdraw your presentation today. You're going to tell the board that you need more time to refine your strategy, and you're going to start showing me the respect that my position deserves." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Months of work, her career advancement, her professional reputation. He was asking her to sacrifice everything to soothe his wounded ego. The injustice of it made her hands tremble with suppressed rage. "I won't do that," she said quietly but firmly. "My presentation is solid, the board is expecting it, and I've done nothing that requires an apology or withdrawal." Marcus's expression darkened further. He moved behind his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out what appeared to be a folder filled with documents. Sarah couldn't see the contents, but his confident smirk suggested he believed he held some kind of leverage over her. "Maybe you need a reminder of how things work around here," he said, his tone becoming openly threatening. "Maybe you need to understand that there are consequences for employees who don't know their place." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls seeming to close in as Sarah realized the true nature of this encounter. This wasn't about business strategy or professional disagreements. This was about power, control, and a man who couldn't tolerate a woman's success in what he considered his domain. "I think we should end this conversation," Sarah said, moving toward the door. "The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, and I need to prepare." "Stop," Marcus commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "We're not finished here." Sarah turned back to face him, her heart pounding, but her resolve strengthening. She had worked too hard and come too far to be intimidated by someone who saw her success as a personal threat. Whatever game Marcus was playing, whatever leverage he thought he had, she wouldn't be bullied into destroying her own career. "Actually, we are finished," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "I'm going to present my strategy to the board as planned, and I'm going to continue doing my job to the best of my ability." Marcus slammed the folder down on his desk, the sound echoing through the office like a gunshot. His face was flushed with anger, and Sarah could see that her defiance was pushing him towards something dangerous. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said through gritted teeth. "You think because you're smart and work hard that you can just walk in here and take whatever you want. But this isn't some merit-based fantasy world, Sarah. This is business. And business has rules that go beyond your precious presentations and data analysis." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she recognized the implications of his words. This conversation was no longer about professional disagreements or even workplace politics. This was about someone who believed that her success somehow diminished his own worth, someone who would go to extraordinary lengths to maintain control. The digital clock on Marcus's desk showed 9:45. In 15 minutes, she would either be presenting the most important proposal of her career, or she would be explaining to a room full of executives why she was abandoning months of work because of one man's insecurity.
"I'm leaving now," Sarah said, reaching for the door handle.
"Take it off," Marcus said suddenly, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. Sarah froze, her hand on the door handle, not sure she had heard correctly. The words seemed to hang in the air, creating a moment of terrible clarity about exactly what kind of situation she had found herself in. "Excuse me?" she said, turning slowly to face him. Marcus was standing behind his desk, his expression a mixture of rage and something else, something that made Sarah's instincts scream danger. The morning light streaming through his office windows seemed harsh and unforgiving, illuminating a scene that felt surreal and frightening. "You heard me," he said, his voice steady but filled with menace. "Take off that blazer. Take off that superior attitude. Take off everything that makes you think you're better than the system that got me where I am." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She understood now that this had never been about presentations or professional disagreements. This was about power in its most primitive and ugly form. This was about a man who couldn't tolerate being outperformed by a woman who believed that humiliation was an appropriate response to competence. But as the shock of his words began to fade, something else took its place. Not fear, though that was certainly present. Not confusion about what was happening, because that had become crystal clear. What replaced her initial shock was a cold, calculating anger that seemed to sharpen her focus rather than cloud it. Sarah looked at Marcus standing behind his desk, at his expensive suit and family photos, at the corner office that represented everything he had been given rather than earned. She thought about her own journey, the nights spent studying, the extra hours invested in every project, the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of opportunities that came naturally to men like him. And then, for the first time since entering his office, Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile, or a nervous smile, or even an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized that her opponent had made a critical error in judgment. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated for the last time. "That," she said quietly, her voice carrying a confidence that seemed to fill the entire room, "was your worst decision." Marcus seemed taken aback by her response, clearly expecting fear or compliance rather than this calm, almost predatory confidence. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah held up a hand to stop him. "No," she said, still smiling that dangerous smile. "It's my turn to talk now." The silence in Marcus's office stretched for several seconds, during which Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of the office building coming to life. She had crossed a line, and there would be no going back. But for the first time in months of dealing with Marcus's increasingly hostile behavior, she felt completely in control of the situation. "You want to know what I think about your little power play?" Sarah continued, her voice maintaining that eerily calm tone. "I think you've just given me exactly what I need to destroy everything you think you've built here." Marcus's confident smirk began to falter. Whatever response he had expected to his degrading command, this wasn't it. Sarah could see confusion beginning to cloud his features as he tried to process her reaction. "You see, Marcus," Sarah said, moving away from the door and walking slowly toward his desk, "you made a fundamental mistake. You assumed that because I've been professional and respectful, that meant I was weak. You assumed that because I've played by the rules, I didn't know how to break them when necessary." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her smartphone, holding it up so he could see the screen. "This conversation has been recorded from the moment you told me to take something off. Every word, every threat, every inappropriate comment is now documented." The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications hit him. Sarah could see his mind racing, trying to calculate the damage, trying to find a way out of the trap he had walked into. "You can't do that," he stammered. "It's illegal to record someone without consent." Sarah's smile widened. "Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. I consent. The law doesn't require your permission." She paused, letting that sink in. "But that's just the beginning of your problems." She moved to one of the chairs facing his desk and sat down, crossing her legs casually as if they were having a normal business discussion. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and both of them knew it. "Let me tell you what's going to happen next," Sarah said, her voice taking on the same commanding tone Marcus had used earlier. "In about 5 minutes, I'm going to walk into that board meeting. I'm going to give my presentation, and it's going to be brilliant. The board is going to approve my strategy, and they're going to be very impressed with my work." Marcus started to speak, but Sarah held up a finger to silence him, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just minutes earlier. "After the meeting," she continued, "I'm going to have a private conversation with your uncle, the CEO. I'm going to share with him some very interesting information about your behavior, your competence, and your understanding of what this company actually needs to succeed." "You don't have anything on me," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "Oh, Marcus, you really don't understand what's been happening around here, do you?" She pulled a small folder from her briefcase, one she had been carrying for weeks. "I've been documenting every inappropriate interaction, every decision you've made that hurt the company, every time you've prioritized your ego over business results." She opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. Marcus leaned forward to look at them, and Sarah watched his expression change from confusion to recognition to horror. "That's the Henderson account," she said, pointing to one document. "The one you lost because you refused to listen to market research that didn't fit your preconceptions. Cost the company $2.3 million in revenue. And," She pointed to another document, the Morrison Project, delayed by 6 weeks because you insisted on micromanaging every decision instead of trusting your team's expertise. We lost the client to a competitor who could deliver on time. Marcus was staring at the papers as if they were evidence of crimes, which, in a business sense, they were. And this, Sarah said, pointing to a thick stack of papers, is a comprehensive analysis of every major decision you've made since becoming head of operations. Would you like to guess the overall impact on company profitability? She didn't wait for him to answer. -12%. In 18 months, your leadership decisions have cost Blackstone Industries millions of dollars and damaged relationships with key clients. Marcus slumped into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him. But Sarah wasn't finished. But the real masterpiece, she said, pulling out her phone again, is what I've discovered about your little side projects. The expense reports that don't quite add up. The mysterious consulting fees paid to companies that seem to exist only on paper. The business trips that somehow never resulted in any actual business. The blood had completely drained from Marcus's face now. Sarah could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the office. You've been embezzling from your own family's company, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Not huge amounts, nothing that would trigger immediate attention, but consistent enough to add up to a significant sum over time. You can't prove that, Marcus whispered, but they both knew it was a desperate lie. Sarah smiled again, that same cold, dangerous expression. I'm an excellent researcher, Marcus. It's what made my marketing strategies so effective. And when I apply those same research skills to financial records, personnel files, and business correspondence, I can uncover all sorts of interesting patterns. She stood up and began collecting her documents, moving with the confident efficiency of someone who had already won the battle. So here's what's actually going to happen, she said, her tone becoming businesslike again. I'm going to give my presentation. The board is going to approve my strategy. And then, depending on how you behave going forward, I'm going to decide what to do with all this information. Marcus looked up at her with something approaching desperation. What do you want? What I want, Sarah replied, is for you to stay out of my way. I want you to stop undermining my work, stop questioning my decisions, and start acting like the professional you're supposed to be. I want you to recommend me for the vice president position that I've already earned through actual merit. She moved toward the door, then turned back to face him one last time. But most importantly, she said, I want you to understand that the days of men like you using power and intimidation to control women like me are over, at least in my world. Marcus seemed to shrink into his chair. The confident, threatening man who had cornered her just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly understood how precarious his position had always been. If you ever speak to me the way you did today, Sarah continued, if you ever suggest that I should remove anything except barriers to my own success, I will destroy you professionally and personally. I will make sure everyone in this industry knows exactly what kind of man you are and what kind of leader you've been. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. One more thing, she said without turning around. That recording I made? It's already been uploaded to a secure cloud server with instructions to be automatically sent to HR, your uncle, and the entire board of directors if anything happens to me. If I get fired suddenly, if I have an unfortunate accident, if I decide to take an unexpected vacation, everyone will hear exactly what you said to me today. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, but not before delivering her final words. Thank you, Marcus. Your worst decision just became the best thing that ever happened to my career. As Sarah walked toward the conference room, she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her system. Her hands were steady now, her breathing calm. She had just turned what should have been the most humiliating moment of her professional life into the foundation for everything she had been working toward. The hallway seemed brighter somehow, the sounds of the office more welcoming. Colleagues greeted her as she passed, unaware that their senior marketing director had just fought and won a battle that would reshape the entire power structure of their company. At 9:58, Sarah entered the executive conference room, where 12 board members were already seated around the polished mahogany table. The CEO, Robert Blackstone, looked up and smiled warmly as she approached the presentation area. Sarah, we've been looking forward to this. he said. "Jenny told us you've developed something revolutionary." Sarah smiled back, feeling a confidence that went far beyond her usual pre-presentation nerves. "Thank you, Mr. Blackstone. I believe what I'm about to share with you will significantly change how we approach our market strategy." As she connected her laptop to the projection system, Sarah caught sight of Marcus entering the room. He looked pale and shaken, avoiding eye contact with everyone as he took his seat at the far end of the table. She felt a moment of satisfaction watching him struggle to compose himself. "Before I begin," Sarah announced to the room, "I want to say that developing this strategy has taught me a lot about recognizing opportunities, understanding power dynamics, and knowing when to take calculated risks." She clicked to her first slide, a bold graphic that immediately captured everyone's attention. Today's presentation is titled Revolutionary Market Positioning: How Bold Decisions Create Lasting Success. She began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room with perfect clarity. As Sarah launched into her presentation, she could feel the energy in the room shift. Board members leaned forward in their chairs, asking insightful questions and nodding approvingly at her responses. The data was compelling, the strategy was brilliant, and her delivery was flawless. But more than that, Sarah could sense something else happening. She was no longer just presenting a marketing strategy. She was demonstrating leadership, vision, and the kind of strength that made people want to follow her direction. 20 minutes into the presentation, Robert Blackstone interrupted with a question that made Sarah's heart race. "Sarah, this is impressive work, the kind of strategic thinking we need more of in leadership positions. Tell me, have you given any thought to what role you'd like to play in implementing this strategy?" Sarah glanced briefly at Marcus, who was staring at his hands, before responding. "I believe I'm ready for whatever level of responsibility this strategy requires, Mr. Blackstone." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Robert smiled broadly. "I think we need to have a conversation after this presentation about your future with this company." As Sarah continued with her presentation, she knew that everything had changed, not just her career prospects, but her entire understanding of her own power and how to use it. Marcus had tried to diminish her, to make her feel small and controllable. Instead, he had awakened something fierce and unstoppable. 3 weeks after the board presentation, Sarah sat in her new corner office, reviewing the final implementation plans for her revolutionary marketing strategy. The nameplate on her door read Sarah Martinez, Vice President of Marketing, and she still felt a small thrill every time she saw it. The promotion had been unanimous, with Robert Blackstone personally announcing to the entire company that Sarah represented the kind of innovative leadership they needed for the future. The morning sun streamed through her floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the city's skyline that had once seemed so distant from her previous office. Now she was part of the executive floor, with a team of 15 reporting directly to her and a budget that reflected the board's confidence in her vision. But the real satisfaction came from what had happened to Marcus. The investigation into his financial irregularities had been swift and thorough. Once Sarah provided the board with her documented evidence, they had hired an external forensic accounting firm to examine every transaction under Marcus's authority. What they found exceeded even Sarah's careful research. Over 2 years, Marcus had embezzled nearly $400,000 through fake consulting contracts, inflated expense reports, and phantom business development initiatives. He had been systematically stealing from his own family's company while simultaneously undermining its operations through incompetent leadership. The morning after the investigation concluded, Sarah had watched from her window as security escorted Marcus from the building. He carried a single cardboard box containing his personal belongings. His company car keys had been confiscated, and his access to all systems had been revoked overnight. But that wasn't the end of his downfall. Sarah's recording of their confrontation had been presented to the board as evidence of Marcus's character and judgment. The audio of him demanding that she take it off had horrified the directors, particularly the 3 women on the board who understood exactly what kind of situation Sarah had faced. "No one should ever have to deal with that kind of behavior in our workplace," Robert Blackstone had said during the emergency board meeting. The fact that Sarah handled it with such professionalism while also protecting the company's interests shows exactly the kind of leader we need. Marcus faced both civil and criminal charges for embezzlement, with the district attorney's office treating the case as a high-priority white-collar crime. His attempts to claim that Sarah had somehow entrapped or blackmailed him fell apart when presented with the mountain of evidence she had collected over months of careful documentation. But perhaps the most devastating consequence for Marcus was the loss of his family's support. Robert Blackstone had been forced to choose between protecting his nephew and protecting the company his grandfather had built. The choice had been easier than Marcus probably expected. "I'm ashamed that someone from our family behaved this way," Robert had announced to the senior staff. "Marcus has betrayed not just his colleagues, but the values that this company was founded on." Sarah's assistant, Jenny, knocked on her office door and entered with the morning's correspondence. "The final reports from the forensic accountants," Jenny said, placing a thick folder on Sarah's desk. "And there's something else you should know. Marcus's wife filed for divorce yesterday. Apparently, she discovered he had been using their personal accounts to cover some of the money he took from the company." Sarah felt a moment of sympathy for Marcus's family, who were dealing with the consequences of his actions through no fault of their own. But that sympathy was tempered by her knowledge of how he had treated other employees over the years, and how many careers he might have damaged if his behavior had continued unchecked. "Also," Jenny continued, "the local business journal wants to do a feature story about your promotion and the new marketing strategy. They're calling it a case study in merit-based leadership." Sarah smiled at the irony. The story would highlight exactly what Marcus had been so threatened by: the idea that competence and hard work could overcome traditional power structures. At 10 o'clock, Sarah had a meeting with the senior leadership team to review the first month's results from implementing her marketing strategy. The numbers exceeded even her optimistic projections, with new client acquisitions up 35% and customer engagement metrics showing unprecedented growth. As she walked to the conference room, Sarah passed Marcus's old office, which was being renovated for the new head of operations, a woman named Rebecca Chen, who had been promoted from the company's West Coast division. Rebecca had 20 years of experience and a track record of turning around underperforming departments. The conference room was buzzing with positive energy as Sarah entered. The marketing team she now led was presenting their latest campaign results to the other department heads, and the enthusiasm was infectious. "Sarah, these numbers are incredible," said David from sales. "Whatever you did to transform the marketing approach, it's working beyond anything we hoped for." As Sarah took her seat at the head of the table, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Not just her title or salary, but her entire understanding of how power really worked and how to use it effectively. "The key," Sarah said to the group, "was recognizing that real strength comes from competence, preparation, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." After the meeting, Robert Blackstone asked Sarah to join him in his office for their weekly strategy session. These meetings had become one of Sarah's favorite parts of her new role, as she found Robert to be an engaged and thoughtful leader who valued her input on company-wide decisions. "I want to talk to you about something," Robert said as they sat in his executive suite. "The board has been discussing succession planning, and your name keeps coming up in conversations about the future of this company." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained her professional composure. "The way you handled the situation with Marcus showed us something important," Robert continued. "You didn't just protect yourself, you protected the entire company from someone who was damaging it from within. That's the kind of judgment and courage we need in our senior leadership." He leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "I'm not talking about immediate changes, but I want you to start thinking about broader responsibilities. Strategic planning, merger and acquisition decisions, maybe even a seat on the board of directors." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with determination. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of achieving, was becoming possible not because she had compromised her values, but because she had refused to do so. "I appreciate your confidence in me, Mr. Blackstone," Sarah replied. "I'm ready for whatever challenges you think I can help the company overcome." That afternoon, Sarah received a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she saw that it was from Marcus. "I know what you did," the message read. "This isn't over." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, then did something that would have seemed impossible just a month earlier. She laughed. Marcus was facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits, divorce proceedings, and complete professional disgrace. and he was still trying to intimidate her. She forwarded the message to her lawyer and to HR, adding it to the growing file of evidence that Marcus couldn't accept responsibility for his own actions. Then she deleted his number and blocked it from her phone. At 6 o'clock, Sarah finally finished her work for the day and prepared to leave the office. As she gathered her things, she looked around her new workspace. The awards on the walls, the strategic plans spread across her conference table, the view of the city that reminded her daily of how far she had come. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister Maria. "Saw the article about your promotion in the business journal. So proud of you. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate?" Sarah smiled as she typed back. "Definitely. I have some stories to tell you." As she walked to the elevator, Sarah thought about the moment that had changed everything. That instant when Marcus had overplayed his hand so dramatically that he gave her exactly what she needed to take control of the situation. "Take it off," he had commanded, thinking he could reduce her to something small and manageable. Instead, he had stripped away any doubt about who she really was and what she was capable of achieving. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the elevator descended, she caught her reflection in the polished doors. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had turned her adversary's worst decision into her greatest opportunity. When the elevator reached the lobby, Sarah walked through the marble halls with the same confidence she had felt that morning 3 weeks ago, but now it was backed by proven strength and undeniable success. Outside, the city was alive with the energy of people pursuing their ambitions, facing their challenges, and working to build their futures. Sarah felt connected to all of it, part of a larger story about what happens when people refuse to accept limitations that others try to impose on them. As she walked to her car, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert Blackstone's name. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening," he said when she answered. "Not at all, Mr. Blackstone. What can I do for you?" "I just got off the phone with our board chairman. We'd like you to attend the quarterly board meeting next week, not as a presenter, but as a participant. We're considering adding a new executive position, Chief Strategy Officer, and we want to discuss it with you." Sarah felt her heart racing, but her voice remained steady. "I'd be honored to participate in that discussion. What you did, standing up to Marcus, protecting the company, showing us what real leadership looks like. That took courage. The kind of courage this company needs more of." After ending the call, Sarah sat in her car for a moment, processing how dramatically her life had changed. Marcus had tried to break her down, to force her into submission through humiliation and intimidation. Instead, his worst decision had become the catalyst for her greatest triumph. She started her car and drove toward home, where she would spend the evening planning for a future that seemed limitless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances to show that competence and character would always triumph over entitlement and intimidation. But tonight, she would celebrate the simple satisfaction of knowing that, when faced with a critical choice, she had chosen courage over compliance, strength over submission, and that choice had made all the difference. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah's phone buzzed one more time. This message was from Jenny. "Saw the news about the Chief Strategy Officer position. The whole team is rooting for you. You've shown all of us what's possible. Everyone says the world would be the first town in the future person. Other people are at the same time. This is the book. It's about history. And that's town made competitiveness. Others of 9 organizations being more than 6 persons. It had become proof that the right decision made at the right moment could change not just one person's life but create ripples that transformed entire organizations. Marcus had demanded that she take something off. Instead, she had taken off the gloves and won everything.